Coming up tonight, Mother Nature tries to stop the Ovation. We learn what it's like to get the royal treatment, and things are coming to an end, so it's time to take a look back at the past 11 nights on board this beautiful inaugural Alaskan sailing for the Ovation. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day number 11 of the theCruiseView from Onboard, the Ovation of the Seas. Of course, this is day number 11 of an 11-night Alaskan sailing, which unfortunately means this is the final episode of this voyage. And that means we've got a loaded episode, all the things went on today, but also that look back at everything that went on over the past 11 days and how everything went for that time. So, for our location today, we were making our way back to Seattle, the second of 2 sea days on our way back. And our noontime location had us at 48 degrees and 45 minutes north by 125 degrees and 58 minutes west. The closest land at the time was Vancouver Island, roughly 19 miles off the port side. And this evening we entered the inlet to start our way even closer to Seattle and Vancouver at about 4 p.m. As of this time, I have not spotted any other cruise ships in the area. We've seen many freight ships, cargo ships, all different kinds of industrial ships, but the Celebrity Solstice is very close by. She is in Victoria today and will be in Seattle with us tomorrow morning. So at the moment, she is sailing behind us at about 18 knots while we're going about 12. So she should catch us about when we get to Seattle tomorrow morning. As for the weather today, we had a sunrise this morning at 5:34 a.m. and tonight we had a sunset at 9:02 p.m. Got a chance to catch it this evening in between shows, a lot of colors. This is the 11th night, the 11th sunset of the sailing, and I don't think I saw the sun actually fall below the horizon a single time on this voyage, which is rare. That's one of those things I look for almost every day. For some reason, the way these sunsets were, it always seemed to be blocked by something, blocked by the mountains, the clouds. Never actually caught the sun falling below the horizon, but every night there were those beautiful colors, that light shining over the sky, right on the horizon, over the top of the mountains, and that was a beautiful sight every single day, and tonight was no exception with those colors shining through. This afternoon we had a listed high of 59, and it was warm at moments. It was actually nicest in the morning. In the morning we had some beautiful blue skies, warm weather, absolutely perfect morning out there. But then as the day went on, it got incredibly cloudy around noon and the fog rolled in. We were using the foghorn to try to make it sure everybody knew where we were because it was very dense fog. You could not see much around the ship. And it got cold at that time, primarily because the sun was the primary heat and warmth of the day. So as soon as the clouds and that fog rolled in, sun was blocked and it got chilly out there to be on the top decks. We did have much calmer seas today than we had yesterday. There was still a little bit of rockiness out there, a little bit of choppiness, but nothing that was really moving the ship around or causing a disruption to things. And it was very windy out there at 23 knots, but it was once again blowing in the same direction as the ship. So it was rather calm wind conditions out there, and for periods of time the wind was actually blowing forward over the ship and blowing the exhaust from the funnel over the front of the ship for once. So it was an overall nice day out there. Unfortunately, that fog really kind of messed up what could have been a beautiful day overall. So moving on to our compass then, last day at sea, last chance everybody has to really enjoy the Ovation of the Seas, see and do everything there is to offer on board, everything that they have not accomplished up to this point, and get it in before the sailing comes to an end. So yesterday we had the view from the top event in the morning. Today we had the official Captain's Corner. This was the Captain's Corner as we know it, with the captain and the cruise director doing a Q&A. There were no other officers involved, of course. They were fractured off into their own event yesterday. So it was primarily the captain explaining things about how he navigates the ship, how the ship operates, and of course some questions about the different ports of call in Alaska and how things were handled. So be sure to check that video out for all the information that was included in there. And that was at 10 a.m., lasted about an hour till 11 in 270. So of course, 270, the perfect morning venue for an event, because you can get that breakfast there and sit and relax and watch the event while eating. Following that, I had a bit of time to walk around the ship, enjoy some last moments, and head up to the top decks. Somewhere that yesterday, surprisingly, I never made it above deck 10 yesterday, but today I made it up to the pool deck. And when I walked out there, that foghorn was going off continuously because of the fogging conditions around the ship, but North Star was actually running. North Star was going up and down. It was listed as reservations required from, I believe, 9 a.m. to 4:30, and then no reservations 4:30 to 7. But at noon, there's pretty much nobody on it. There was a handful of people, so I walked over, checked. They were open, operating. Nobody was waiting for it. So I got right on a North Star ride at about 12:15. It's just me and 2 other people up there at the time. And as you'd expect in fogging conditions, you could not see a whole lot. But I've done North Star 6 times on this sailing now. I've done it in Vancouver, at sea, Icy Strait Point, Sitka, Skagway, and now I did it in foggy conditions. In the past, I've done it at all kinds of ports, from Cape Liberty many times, at sea, Barbados, Nassau, a whole bunch of ports. Of course, you can check out all those North Star videos. But the big thing is I've done them in high winds and all kinds of conditions, but I've never done it in fog, so this was a new experience to try the North Star in fog and see what that's like. And obviously you can't see a whole lot, but when you're at sea, there's not a whole lot to see oftentimes. What this was more about was the coolness of being up there in the fog. From the pool deck, the North Star capsule really started to fade away as it reached the top of its height. And when you're in the North Star, it was actually more difficult to take photos because it was all gray out there, and it made the capsule a bit more reflective when trying to photograph through the glass. But as you went up higher, the aft of the ship started to fade away. So that was kind of a neat effect. See the ship actually covered in the fog from above, see the ship start fading away as you go higher. Really was a neat way to spend a couple of minutes and see the ship in another way, something that we have not seen before, of course, through the fog. So that was 12:15, took until about 12:30. Then I went over to the Windjammer for lunch. Obviously, we are getting back to Seattle. The conditions weren't the best today, but on that back deck, it was still a beautiful day to sit out there and have some lunch. It's pretty much been a beautiful day on that back deck every day that we've been on board this ship, even when the pool deck wasn't the best condition. So it's always good to check that out, because the Windjammer often gets crowded, but that back deck is often a bit more empty, as people don't walk all the way to the back to check it out, or don't even know it's there in some cases. But today was a big lunch for the Windjammer. It was the final day, and that meant they had a couple extra festivities. They had a parade with all the waiters, as we often see in the dining room, followed by the chicken dance right in the middle of the buffet setup area. And to go along with those festivities, they also had a massive cake setup, including one very large cake to wish everybody a fond farewell from the sailing. So that was a bit more of a special Windjammer than we've seen the other days. And this whole sailing, the Windjammer has been operating at a slightly elevated level compared to other ships. The maitre d' in the Windjammer has often been making announcements, as we see in the main dining room, and not just clear your table, but actual announcements thanking people and giving information and providing extra details about what's going on. So the Windjammer has certainly been operating much more like a traditional dining room than a quick, easy buffet during the sailing, and that, of course, continued today with the dance that we often only see in the main dining room. So that was 12:30. Walked around the ship a bit more, checked the iFly to see if I can get a second run in there. Of course, did it on, I believe, day 2 of this sailing. They were not doing secondary runs on the sailing. They said they were booked for the day. I checked it out a little bit later, and it looked like there were only about 2 or 3 people in each class, and they were going for about 2 minutes. So I think overall today they were purely doing the for-fee runs of the iFly, which are normally held at night or in the early mornings, but today it looked like they were running those all day long instead of filling with secondary runs for the end of this sailing. And it was an 11-night sailing on both Quantum and Anthem on those longer sailings. They've traditionally allowed those secondary runs towards the end of the sailing. That does not appear to be the case on Ovation of the Seas. With the 7-night sailings in Alaska, that's not necessarily a big deal, as they often don't allow secondary runs on those 7-night sailings anyway. After a bit of a walk, I headed to the cabin, got all my packing done for the day in the afternoon so I could enjoy my evening, starting at 5:15 with dinner. Tonight was day 11 and casual, obviously, with everybody being packed up. The final menu of this voyage, and another mishmash of other menus from this sailing. It started off, for me at least, with the Asian-style pork tacos. Delicious dish that, of course, originated in Silk itself. On board the original Quantum of the Seas, that was a special appetizer exclusively for Silk, and has since made its way to the traditional menu on board ships. And I think I had it on Symphony of the Seas. I know I had it on one previous sailing in addition to Quantum. And that was, of course, a delicious one. The biggest thing with that dish is the actual taco itself. It is not a traditional taco, it's not bread. It is a very soft, moist roll that they use for it, and that is what really gives it the most flavor. That's what makes it a truly delicious dish compared to some of the other dishes. Because of course you can get tacos anywhere on the ship, but you can only get that as a starter when offered in the main dining room. In addition to that, I opted for soup. They had a tomato soup today. They had tomato soup at lunch the other day when I went, and they've had it a few other times in different places. Today's included a little bit of pesto sauce in it as well, which was different. And then for my entree, they've been doing a lot of substitutions throughout this sailing, and that continued today. They were supposed to have a tagliatelle dish. They swapped it out with a cannelloni and had a mushroom sauce. Didn't go for that. Instead, I asked for it with the bolognese sauce and was able to get the cannelloni with bolognese sauce for today. That was a delicious dish. I've never actually had cannelloni in any of the Royal Caribbean main dining rooms. I'm not sure it's actually even offered on a traditional sailing. It could be something they do at lunch. They do much more with the pasta options at lunch than they do for dinner. And maybe they had some extra and brought it up for dinner, but in whatever case, it was a delicious dish, and hopefully one that they bring onto the other ships, because it was a tasty pasta. For dessert, I then went with another somewhat Quantum classic, just like that starter. When Quantum of the Seas set sail, American Icon Grill had a delicious dessert. The warm donuts that, I believe it was actually coffee and donuts or something along those lines, and it was warm donuts that were served with a little cup of like a coffee sauce that you could dip in. On this one, it was warm donuts, and it came with a little cup of whipped cream with some chocolate syrup in it. Not as good as the original one in American Icon. The donut dipping in whipped cream tasted good, but it wasn't really anything special. It was certainly much better on Quantum when they had the actual coffee-like sauce that you were dipping it in. And I think I've had it on another ship where they had a chocolate syrup that you dipped it in, which would also be much better. The whipped cream just doesn't cut the dryness of the donut quite enough to make it a good dessert. But alongside that, I did get ice cream. Yesterday I tried that strawberry ice cream, and it was absolutely delicious in the main dining room with the fresh piece of the strawberry in it. So tonight I went with that strawberry ice cream a second time. After dinner, we did have a couple entertainment items for the night, the last night on board, and not only did the guests want to get everything in, but the cruise director staff wanted to ensure everybody got their last bits of entertainment in as well. So it started at 8:30. We had farewell showtime starring Phil Pallisel, and that was a little different than the normal headliners, of course, because it was the farewell show. The headliner was the secondary act of the event. Started with a member of the Royal Caribbean Singers coming out performing 2 songs along with the Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas Orchestra for the background. And after that, Chris Brown then came out to talk to the crowd, wish everybody that final farewell, give them their best wishes, and most importantly, introduce the main headline of the show, Phil Pallisel, and bring him out to do his comedy. He was another comedian. We've seen a couple of comedians during the sailing, and surprisingly, they've all been different. We saw, I think, 2 of them on Anthem of the Seas, and they were very similar styles. On this sailing, I think we're up to 3 or 4 comedians now, and each one has been a completely different style. This one tonight is probably closest compared to perhaps an Ellen DeGeneres style. It was a very thought-provoking comedy. All the jokes had a little more thought. You had to think through the punchline rather than just laying it out there. And it was all very clean, very family-friendly humor, and overall just a solid comedy act. A lot of storytelling, a lot of elaborate jokes that played out, similar to that Ellen style of comedy. So that was probably about a half hour, maybe 25 minutes of his actual routine before Chris Brown came back out to give a few more words to the crowd and bring out the Royal Caribbean singers and dancers for a final farewell moment that culminated with a whole bunch of the Ovation of the Seas cast, the Ovation of the Seas crew members from throughout the ship, from the housekeeping to the dining room, the kitchen, all throughout the ship, the sports deck, the cruise director staff all coming out along with many of the officers to give their final farewell for everybody leaving tomorrow morning. And that is something I believe it was Jewel of the Seas that we saw for the first time. It was almost identical down to the music choice for that closing moment. So I think that's a standard thing that Royal Caribbean has created, that ships can opt in or out, because we didn't see it on Symphony, we didn't see it on Anthem. Anthem had the farewell moment right back here in the Esplanade. Symphony didn't really have any kind of farewell, but we did see it once before, I'm pretty sure, on Jewel of the Seas. Once that ended, I took to the ship, tried to see a couple different items, step in and catch a glimpse of them. The nightlife on the ship, I haven't mentioned it too much, but there is music all over the place. And at 9:30, they did have another Hush Silent party over in 270. I went to check it out, hoping to see another Vistarama. We haven't seen Vistaramas this whole sailing, really. We saw the library one during the one jazz performance. We saw the space one during every Hush Silent party, and we saw that one being used again tonight. We saw the Infinite City in a static time moment, used one time, I forget what the event was, and then we saw the Royal Fleet being used in a static moment as well for the backdrop of the Crown and Anchor loyalty event. So we haven't seen too many Vistaramas. There's a whole lot more out there that we've seen in the past. And of course, with Anthem of the Seas, they use them like crazy. They use them as the backdrop for almost every event in some way. The waterfalls, the islands, just some kind of scenic background to give the room a little extra ambience. But we didn't see any of those nature ones utilized during this sailing, let alone the more advanced ones that we've seen before. Then headed back across the ship to the Royal Theatre. There was a pair of conflicting events going on tonight that I tried to stop into. First, I spent a little bit of time over in the Royal Theatre at 10:15. They had late night adult comedy with Phil Palisol as well, which gave him a chance to continue his routine for the night. He had that shorter show for the first and second seating guests, but now he got to finish that routine with an adult-only edition at 10:15. And that one, from his main show, it left me kind of curious what he would do in this one, because he didn't seem the kind of person that would truly go all in on the adult subjects, and that is exactly what he did. He pretty much met my expectations. He utilized language, he utilized subjects, innuendos, where necessary, where appropriate, didn't push the envelope, didn't intentionally force anything or make it get that shock value of using curse words or something. It was a solid comedy, hilarious, just like his main act, but no filter or need to keep it clean, allowed it to just go where it naturally flowed to. So that one I got to see about 15 minutes of, because at 10:30 then, directly across the hall in Music Hall, was the Battle of the Sexes game show. So that one was not a very large crowd. It was pretty empty. Normally that's held a little bit earlier in the sailing and gets a pretty big crowd. It's usually a popular event. It used to be much more popular. It used to be on the level of the Quest and held in Studio B. Over the years, it's slowly been shrunk down to a standard game show like many of the others. Tonight it was on the final night, and while the venue was not very full, they did have a full lineup of contestants. They had 12 people participating, and they allowed swap outs between each round of the game, which I haven't seen them do in past shows. And that was extremely entertaining, as it always is. They pretty much did the traditional game, the same acts that you often expect. the move around and the start with the trivia. Then they go to the numbers and have them get into the order quickly. Of course, the balloon challenge is always the most hilarious of all the rounds of the game. So that was 10:30. It lasted about 45 minutes. I think it got done about 11:15, right around the same time that the comedian ended for the night. From there, I walked the ship a little more, stopped into a couple different venues. One of the nice things about Ovation of the Seas is it is very different musical style to the evening than the other ships. Normally, when we're sailing out of the East Coast in New York, even down in Florida, Boleros is loaded with Latin music. You got a pub artist who's very acoustic and more contemporary and softer tones. You've got a piano player, which on Anthem on the last sailing was a hilarious over-the-top performance, but usually pretty mellow performance. On here, it's a little different. Music hall is not the only place you see rock. When you go around, the pub performers got rock, the schooner bars going on to that edgy side of rock, along with the adult contemporary classics. The band in Boleros is usually the one that is not in music hall for that night. So throughout the ship, it is all fairly similar music, but each one of the talents brings their own style, their own humor, entertainment, their own interest and flair to it to attract the crowd in, and they each seem to garner their own audience that continues to turn out each night of the sailing. And those crowds throughout the ship, it's amazing. That first night, it was pretty empty. I forget when I filmed it. I think it might have even been like 11:30 because the ship was so empty. Now on the last night, every one of those venues was filled probably about 20-30 minutes after the performances ended, because there were so many people that just showed up every night and was socializing to close out the night. So the music on the ship is incredible. There's so many bands and they all perform such good music compared to some of the other ships where there really is that niche spot for each person. Each of these bands performs a lot of the same songs. You can sometimes walk through here and you'll hear the same song play at different times in each of the venue. Seems like Sweet Caroline's a big popular one that I've heard in almost every one of the venues each night. But it just lets you choose that artist that you really kind of match to the best, rather than being forced to have one option, and if you don't like them, kind of being stuck for the sailing. So that led us to about 12:30. There was the music hall continues on much later than that. The rest of the venues are pretty much shut down for the night now. Music hall goes probably till about 2 a.m. or later. Usually depends on the crowd size or the time of night. There is an ultimate cutoff, but if the crowd dwindles a little bit, they will cut it earlier. For the sailing, that really is the end of it as well, because tomorrow is the time that we will be getting off. Still not completely sure when we'll get in. We were scheduled for 6 a.m. Some of the stuff I saw online from the ship tracking was saying 11:30, which is obviously not true since it's 1:16 right now and we're still sailing in. So it's probably closer to that 6 a.m. that we will get into port tomorrow. And along with the port will be the Celebrity Solstice. So we won't be alone. We'll have a second ship, a second Royal Caribbean-owned ship to check out while in port. And of course, the Solstice is the original Quantum. The Quantum of the Seas was an enhanced and large Solstice class ship. So it's always neat when you get to see those two classes together in a port. Then continuing on with our interview series for the sailing, we normally don't do interviews on the last night, but I try to avoid those port days with interviews, and that means that we have one more to share tonight. I got to sit down with the Royal Genie and learn a little bit more about that sweet life on board. Today I am joined by Hannah, who is a Royal Genie on board the Ovation of the Seas. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. So my name's Hannah. I come all the way from England, and we're here today to talk about the Royal Genie and the Royal Suite class.
So what led you to join Royal Caribbean?
I always wanted to travel, so obviously working on a ship, it's a great way to see the world, and then I love working with people, so my background comes from hotels, and then I decided to change and switch to ships, and here I am.
So the concept of the suite classes and the Royal Genies is fairly new to Royal Caribbean. Could you give a little bit of an overview of it?
Okay, yes. So it's around 3 years old now, the whole Royal Genie program. So as we started to introduce the big ships, it came into place to help the guests organize all of the activities and their dining options, as some of our suites there, they like this personal service.
Could you explain a bit about the different levels of the suites?
Yes, so in the Quantum and Oasis class, these are the ships which have the Royal Genie service, and it's all part of the Royal Suite class. So we have the Sea class, Sky class, and Star class. The Star class is the suite which comes with the Royal Genie, and all of the benefits which we'll explain a little bit later. The Sky class has the access to Coastal Kitchen and also access to the Concierge Lounge, and then the C class is the Junior Suites.
So what is the requirement to become a Royal Genie?
Being a Royal Genie, before you have to have guest service experience. Myself, I worked in guest services for 3 contracts. We need to know about all of the departments, that's the reason for that. We also do the British Butler training, and we have this pin on our uniform. So this is something we do with someone called Gary Williams, who used to be the head butler at the Ritz Hotel. And he explains real attention to detail and exactly how to speak to the guests and how to capture the guest preferences.
Okay. So the Royal Genie experience starts before the guest ever gets to the ship. What is the pre-cruise experience like? Yes,
correct. So we start reaching out to the guests 4 weeks before ourselves as the Royal Genie. But they will be receiving around 6 weeks prior to the cruise a questionnaire. So this is where they can go ahead and fill in some of their preferences about the dinners, their likes and dislikes. So we get to know a little bit about them before we reach out to them 1 month before. When we start speaking to them a month prior to the cruise, we already start getting to know them. So before they even join the ship, we already know some of their preferences and a little bit more detail about them, which helps create the perfect cruise for them.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So what is the onboard guest experience like for somebody?
So the whole point of the Royal Genie program is all about convenience. So right from the boarding, we like to make sure they have a smooth process. So there's priority boarding. When they come on board, we sit down and start going through all of the benefits. We do this at the beginning so they can go and explore the ship, and they have priority for all of the activities. Here on Ovation, we have a lot going on in the Seaplex, like the roller skating bumper cars and the trapeze. So we like them to know they can take advantage of doing that. As well as Coastal Kitchen, I guess they can go to the specialty restaurants, Chops or Jamie's, and it's unlimited for them throughout the whole cruise. Also the Surf and Stream internet they get, the mini bar. So there's a lot of benefits which we like to get them to use.
Yep. So you're talking to the guests before they ever board as well as on board. What is the ratio and that overall management like to the guests and the Royal Genies?
So on this ship we have 3 Royal Genies and we have 8 suites that we take care of. So it's one Genie has 2 and the other Genies, they have 3 suites. So we just have to be organized with all of the communication before, and it works like that. Mm-hmm.
So in addition to the Royal Genies, they have access to the Suite Lounge. What kind of offerings do they have there?
So the Suite Lounge, it's a beautiful lounge at the back of the ship. They have the cocktail hours there, so it's a great place for our guests to go and meet and mingle with the other suite guests, and some canapes. They also have the concierge, but of course they have us as the Royal Genie as well.
Okay. So for somebody that is not thinking they truly need a genie, someone taking care of them, what is the main reason that when they get on board they kind of realize, you know what, that was good to have?
So we're there to create the most amazing experience. Not only are we going to organize their dinners and reserve the seats at the show, but as we get to know them, we start thinking about how we can surprise them. And before they even think of something to ask, we're one step ahead of them. So like this morning, my guest did the North Star when we was doing the glaciers, and when they came back they had hot chocolates and cookies waiting in for the rooms. So without them even asking, we're one step ahead thinking about what they would like. Most of our guests, they come in for celebrating anniversaries or birthdays, so we can do nice surprise decorations and cakes and everything. So it's a really special touch for the guests. Much more personal service than just giving them the cruise compass and saying, okay, this is the dinner and the show. So,
yeah.
Yes.
So what is next for you after this contract?
Okay, so I'm about to finish this contract. I'm coming back to Ovation to finish the Alaska season, which will be great, and then we'll head back to Australia. So that's what's next.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell the viewers?
I think we've covered pretty much everything. Obviously there is a lot to the Royal Genie program, but come and cruise on Ovation, Star Class style, and find out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As always, gotta thank Hannah for taking the time to talk to me. Suite life is probably the area of the ship I know the least about. Never stayed in a suite. I know a lot about the engineering side, a lot about what the captains do. I've talked to so many of these areas of the ship several times, but this is the first time I've talked to a Royal Genie or anybody that has to do with that side of the operation. So it was certainly an interesting interview, and hopefully you learn a little more about what is offered. Those Genies are certainly an interesting new concept that Royal Caribbean is offering on the Quantum and the Oasis class of ships. If you get one of those higher suites, they really do cater to you, and of course you get that nice perk of the reserved seats in the shows. Now that is the end of the sailing. We've got no more dines or venue tours to talk about. We got all the interviews in, our compasses, weather, locations, everything is done. The only thing left is to take a look back at how things went. And happy to say this was an incredibly smooth sailing. We've seen things start to go a little bit downhill on the health side of things. A lot of incidents with alpha calls. It really got out of control on that last Anthem sailing. Symphony of the Seas got much better, but there's still a couple things. We had that zipline incident. This sailing, one alpha call for the entire voyage. That's all I heard the whole time, was that one alpha call on an earlier day. I'm not sure the exact day, but that was the only one. And I did not witness any kind of incidents. Never saw anybody truly get hurt or anything go on. So that is incredibly good, because for a while there it was looking like we're gonna get into a pretty rough pattern, but we have certainly turned the curve and got better with Symphony, and this sailing was absolutely smooth. Not a single incident to really talk about of the entire voyage. And on top of that, the crew was incredible. The crew is, of course, the thing that differentiates the ship. This is the third Quantum class ship. We did the Quantum of the Seas, the Anthem of the Seas. That was launched fall 2014, spring 2015, 6 months apart. Ovation of the Seas launched 1 year after Anthem, a year and a half after Quantum of the Seas. Almost identical. Couple small tweaks, and the main thing, she was sent straight to China and has been sailing China and Australia, now in the US for the very first time, and that crew really is the thing that separates her from the rest. Even compared to some of the other ships like the Symphony of the Seas, the crew cannot compare to what we have on board the Ovation of the Seas. They are by far the friendliest crew that I have experienced on board a ship, easily topping even the Independence of the Seas, who had that title up to now. One of the really interesting things about this sailing is normally you see those low-level workers such as waiters, assistant waiters, your housekeepers. On this sailing we saw a lot of the second level, the supervisors, more prominently, more publicly, and more guest focused than we have in the past. They've been very focused on just inspecting and overseeing their workers. This sailing, the housekeeper came around, introduced himself on the first day, and then his supervisor came around shortly after and introduced herself to everybody. And throughout the sailing, I think I saw her in the hall twice, and on both occasions she said hi and welcomed me by name. So she actually knew the name of every guest in her section, in addition to the staff and the actual housekeepers for those rooms. So that is something I have never seen on a single sailing before. Our housekeeper was incredible this sailing. Anytime he saw us coming down the hall, he'd run to open the door. All the other ones he passed the hall always said hi. On the stairs, past random people, they'd always stop, smile, and say hi to you as you pass. It really was a friendly ship from top to bottom, front to back. day 1 through day 11, that never changed. Everybody was just so welcoming and happy this whole voyage, which might sound a little strange, but a lot of these voyages, crew get a little bit worn out and they lose a little bit of that happiness. This was an 11-night sailing and everybody just seemed so happy and pleasant. All the crew were so welcoming to the guests. And they all just seemed to go that extra mile to ensure the best possible experience for all on board. And that was helped by the weather. This was a sailing for Alaska, not known for its weather, certainly not the Caribbean, not blue skies and sunshine. It is snow and ice, mountaintops, all that good cold weather. But for us, it was an unusually good Alaskan sailing. This whole sailing we've had port of calls. I've never been to Alaska, first time. Expected it to be pretty chilly, did not see as cold a weather condition as I was thinking it would. And as we went through the port of calls, we constantly heard people talk about the fact that the weather was so good. In Hoover Glacier, Juneau, Skagway, and Endicott Arms, 4 of the 6 port of calls of this sailing, people mentioned the fact that you never see weather like we have. That at most there might be 2 or 3 days a year that are as perfect, that they're seeing mountains they never get to see because the skies are just so crystal clear that they can see farther than they normally can. And certainly never in May do they see those kinds of conditions where it's just so perfect out there. So to have 4 days in a row, 4 different port of calls where the weather essentially is 3 in 365 day chance of happening is incredible for a sailing, and something you probably never see. Certainly something that, despite how good the sailing is, probably should make me hesitant to try again, because I doubt we'll ever get as lucky with the weather, because that was truly perfect conditions. At the beginning we had some days where it was foggy, rainy in the morning. It wasn't looking like this would be the best sailing, but that was a little more traditional Alaskan weather. In the afternoons the sun came out. It was beautiful, sunny, nice afternoons, and even those days when the sun was out, it was nicer than many days would be in Alaska. After those first 2 days though, it was all that blue skies and sunshine out there for the remainder of that sailing until these return sea days. Once we hit the Pacific Ocean, we got those rougher seas again. We saw a little bit the first night, nothing too major, nothing to really speak about, but this return trip we did get those rougher seas, and they've now calmed down that we're closer to Seattle in those protected waters, and the entire time we're in Alaska we're in protected waters, so it was much better there as well. The wind even cooperated. We had high winds a couple of these days, and not just a little bit. I mean, near 30 knot winds are pretty significant, but it almost seemed to always go with the ship, which really helped ensure that we had pleasant conditions outside in the top deck, that you could go outside even when we had 30-mile-an-hour winds out there. And with those blue skies, the sun seemed to be the biggest factor in what made the good weather. If it was out, it was incredibly hot sun. If we had cloud cover, it got a little bit cool, and most of those days we had that blue sky, which gave us that perfect weather. And that was great because the Quantum class is the perfect ship for all this weather. She was designed from the ground up for winter. She's claimed to have been designed for the New York market, designed for those voyages from New York down to the Caribbean, but she was certainly designed for Alaska, probably more than anything, because she just seemed to fit so perfectly with this itinerary, with these weather conditions. She seemed like the absolute best ship you could have up here, and certainly seemed far more comfortable sailing through the Alaskan waters and with these conditions and a guest load like this than we see her out of New York even. So she is 3 years old. Quantum class is 4.5 years old. But finally, one of these ships has made it to the place that they seem to have been designed for, the Alaskan waters, and hopefully we'll see one here for the foreseeable future, because she just is perfect for these conditions. And some of that could have been the itinerary as well, because we had not only perfect weather, perfect ship, but also a perfect itinerary. This was a unique itinerary, one that the Ovation of Seas will never do again. This was a hybrid itinerary. When you go to Alaska, you have 3 different choices you can make. 2 of them are almost the same. You can do a one-way trip. Oftentimes it'll go from Vancouver up to Seward, Alaska, and that will hit ports like Icy Straight Point, Sitka, Huber Glacier, Ketchikan, and they'll oftentimes go through the Inside Passage as well, and they'll make their way up to Seward. So you'll get some of those ports that we had. If you go for the round trip, it could be out of Vancouver or Seattle, but it'll often include Juneau, Skagway, Endicott Arms, the Inside Passage, and Victoria to make it a legal sailing. So on our sailing, we had a mix of those two voyages. We had ports from each of them, and the Ovation seas going forward will only do those round trip ones, which means she will not be doing Huber Glacier, Icy Straight Point, or Sitka anytime soon. She won't be doing it the remainder of 2019, and 2020, they've announced all those itineraries. They've been up for sale for a few months now. She will not be doing another 11-night sailing. She will not hit those ports of calls next year at all either. So this was truly a once-and-done itinerary, something special for her. And with this itinerary, of course, we also had sea days. Alaska is not known for its sea days. It is known for port of calls, the views, really going out there and seeing Alaska. But this sailing had 4 sea days, 2 at the beginning, 2 at the end. Very similar to a New York one where you have those sea days at the beginning and the end to get you down to the Caribbean. And that just made this the perfect itinerary. It was perfectly balanced with 2 sea days, 2 days in port, a day sailing through Huber Glacier, 2 more port of calls, another sailing day, and then those 2 sea days. It was just the perfect balance of everything. The only thing I would change in the future is perhaps speeding up our return speed for the final leg of the voyage and moving one of those 2 sea days to the middle, because 6 days in a row of 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. arrivals was very grueling for me, at least, because I'm up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning and I'm getting up about 2 hours before whatever our arrival time is, which meant most nights I was only getting about 2 to 3 hours of sleep during that 6-day stretch, which caught up to me by the end of that. So if we had a sea day in the middle, that certainly would have helped a little bit on there. But overall, this was the perfect voyage, and we got to go to, in my opinion, the 3 best ports of them all were Huber Glacier, which was just beautiful. That is something the Ovation will never do again. She was such a massive ship to sail into that area, get so close to that glacier, offer those incredible views from the top deck down on deck number 5. Out 270, just seeing that huge glacier out the window 270 is something you really can't understand just how impressive it is with those massive windows. The videos and pictures just don't do justice to what this looks like from a Quantum class ship. And all those indoor spaces, the adult solarium, the inside pool, Seaplex 270 gave so much room for people to stay inside, stay warm, and watch that, while there's still enough outdoor space on deck number 15 out on the bridge wings. And of course, deck number 5 to be out there and truly experience it, experience all the elements of the weather and hear all the noise if you chose to, but that was your choice. You could choose either option, the inside or the outside, and there was plenty of room, plenty of views for everybody on both. So that was a perfect day, an absolutely incredible day there. And that is, of course, as I mentioned many times, the only time that will happen. Then, of course, we had Juneau, where we did that dog sledding and helicopter excursion, which was incredible as well. Just getting on that helicopter, first time I've ever flown in a helicopter, and going over those mountains, seeing all that ice, the snow, the dog sleds, getting to play with them. Truly an incredible experience that you can't get in many places, something you can't get right by the port. You got to get up onto that mountain, and that is something that I believe Juneau and Skagway both offer. I think Sitka might offer it as well. I'm not positive on that one, but that one was another incredible port of call. And of course, then there was Skagway with that train ride, that town that just looks like it's straight out of history, straight out of a Western film. And of course, all those views up in the mountain, the snow and the rocks and the ice and the water all just scattered together was incredible to see, and something you never get to see if you come later in the year because it's all melted. So it truly was special to be there in May and get that beautiful view and have those warm, incredible conditions all at once. I mean, that is not something you normally see. So those were 3 out of the 6 protocols are just absolutely incredible, and 2 of those are on the standard Ovation sailing. So if you do Ovation, you will get Juno and you will get Skagway, so you can do those 2 incredible excursions when you're on her. But for Hubbard Glacier, Sitka, and Icy Strait Point, that's it. She's there. We got the pictures, we got the videos, we got the proof she was there, but she won't be coming back anytime soon. And then, of course, she's got a North Star. So when you're in those protocols, you can check out the North Star, get a view over the port like nobody else can, like nobody else is able to offer, because that is unique to the Quantum class as well. And then shifting from the itinerary of the protocols to the ship itself, of course, Quantum class, my favorite class of all the ships. Really can't go wrong with this design. It is so perfectly built and balanced. And of course, one of the big elements of cruising is the food. On board here, you've got a couple different food options for this sailing, at least. The Windjammer and all the other ones had incredible service. The main dining room, Windjammer, Sorrentos, all had great service. And the Windjammer, as I mentioned before, particularly, it was a step up from a traditional Windjammer. The food in the Windjammer, on the other hand, lacked a little bit of variety. I think they were still in their Australia mode, not quite transitioned to the American menu, and that was likely the main issue with that lineup that they had in there. Going forward, I don't think that'll be a problem. Once they're fully in the American mode, the food will change. It'll probably be a little more in alignment with what we're used to on the other ships out of the East Coast. Main dining room, I ate there every night of this sailing, all 11 nights in a row. I don't think I've ever eaten in a main dining room 11 straight nights before, because the only other time we could have done that were those transatlantics, and of course on Quantum of the Season. In both cases, we went to the Windjammer at least one night on each. This time, I didn't even get to the Windjammer to see what the dinner looked like, because there was so much going on, and the main dining room's food and service was so good. The big factor, though, was the itinerary. Because we had late departures, we didn't have the conflicts with a 5 or 6 p.m. departure, so it made it much easier to do the dining room every night. And of course, like every other venue, great quality, great service. We saw a lot of secondary off-menu options on this voyage. We usually haven't seen that in the past. If you didn't like something, they would try to get something for another night, or they'd offer something in the kids' menu. There were soups, there were all different items that were not on the official menu but were offered. So while the menu was definitely smaller looking than we've seen in past sailings, the actual options that were available were on par, if not larger than many of the past sailings, because there were so many off-menu options. So hopefully in the future, they'll realize that people like these options. One of the big ones was the chilled soup being offered almost every day. And hopefully these things will make it to the official menu and be something that's actually listed and advertised, so you know about it before getting to the dining room. 270 Cafe is, of course, signature venue of the Quantum class. Unique to them, a variant of the Park Cafe. It is located directly in 270. So there's breakfast and lunch. I got to go to both multiple times. Always one of my favorites on this class. It's just a great place to go and sit and eat out in the 270 with those great views, watch an event that's going on. Breakfast, they have some great burritos in there, some different sandwiches that you can't get anywhere else on the ship. So it's always a nice change of pace from the Windjammer to go there and get an alternate set of options. And of course at lunch, you get that salad bar with some great pasta salads in there, as well as the variety of sandwiches and soups over on the other side. And on this sailing, it was a bit crowded at points, but oftentimes it was much emptier. It seemed like the crowds really flowed through there pretty swiftly. They were good at getting people through, but it also seemed like for some reason people just flowed in there at a more natural pace rather than all at once, as we've seen on other sailings. So it really wasn't too bad with the waits. And of course, that is probably my favorite venue on board this ship. In the past, I think Solarium has sort of stolen that spotlight. On this ship, unfortunately, the Solarium Bistro was the one venue that was not up to par. It was probably the only one that I kind of avoided. I went there for breakfast once, lunch once. I've never done a dinner in any of the Solarium Bistros in the fleet. But for breakfast, it was just a smaller version of the Windjammer. Nothing unique or special to really make you want to go there. You just got less choices. And it was pretty crowded, usually harder to find a seat than the Windjammer. At lunch, I went one day and it was leftover main diner from 2 days earlier, so it wasn't very good or appetizing. Certainly nothing unique that makes you want to try it out to get something you can't get anywhere else in the ship. So that one was a bit of a letdown. Luckily, the Windjammer 270 Cafe both picked up for it. And of course, you also have Sorrento's and Cafe Promenade back behind me. Great pizza all sailing long. Just like we saw on the Symphony of the Seas, they were offering the plain and pepperoni each night along with a specialty pizza, whether it be a meat lovers, veggie lovers, or Hawaiian. They always had one other kind of specialty pizza on offer each evening. And Quantum Class, they are connected, making it super convenient. They did have the tea and water available in there as they've been doing on recent sailings. That was, of course, the big issue with the original Quantum Class ship where there were no drinks available. But that has continued to be fixed, and that fix has come to Ovation of the Seas as well. And then, of course, the often overlooked, the smallest, and most out-of-the-way dining venue of the entire ship is the Seaplex Doghouse. Located up there in the Seaplex, it offers a variety of hot dogs, and I think I got maybe 2 or 3 hot dogs from there. Just like on the other ships, you got a couple different choices. They have that Coke Freestyle machine. On this ship, they actually offer glasses there so you can get water from it, which they weren't doing on the other ships, so that's a nice little bonus. And it seemed like, in addition to the Seaplex Doghouse, one of the odd things in the past was always that the hot dogs in the Windjammer were not as good. This sailing, it seemed like they actually offered the same hot dogs down in there, including the variety of them. So when you went to the Windjammer, you could actually get some of those Seaplex Doghouse hot dogs without having to go up to the Seaplex and bring it down with you. So that was another nice little bonus, another upgrade to the Windjammer offerings. But it's not all about food, but normally following the food is the entertainment, and Ovation really shined on this one. 11-night sailing, it can sometimes drag on a bit. On a few lengthy sailings like Transatlantics, we've seen them overly repeat events just to fill out the count a little more. We did not really see that much on this sailing. They actually had a very solid lineup, and they used the venues more effectively than I think any other ship that I've ever been on. You've got several main venues here. You've got all the little bars around, but the big ones, you've got 270 in the back, Royal Theater in the front, Music Hall in the middle, and then of course the main pool deck. And across the board, they seem to always have stuff going on. 270 was normally left empty on other sailings. It was not always the most effectively used venue. This sailing, that one was used to its max. They were not using technology, unfortunately. As I said before, very few Vistaromas, no Vistarama shows, no evenings of Vistaromas just showing up on the screen when it's empty, and they didn't do a single Robo Show event, so they really did not utilize 270 for what the technology allows. But what they did do is utilize the venue better than anyone has ever utilized that venue before. You of course got Pixels at night, which was an incredible show. That shortened version of Spectre's Cabaret, which kind of took a little bit away from it, but it was still a great show to see. And beyond that, though, they had lectures in there continuously. They put game shows in there. They really stacked the afternoon every single day with things in there. And that just made it a great venue because with those windows, we're in Alaska. You want to see what's going on, and usually these events are held in some kind of venue like Studio B or somewhere else where you can't see what's going on. In 270, you got those great views. You can watch the landscape go by. You can see the mountains out the window. You can look for whales. We were sitting in there yesterday, and in between two of the events, there were whales right outside the window in 270. They pointed them out, and everybody in 270 was sitting there watching the whales while waiting for the event to start. You can't do that in the Royal Theater. You can't do that on other ships, but the Quantum class allows that. So it is the perfect place for all those events in the afternoon. And then, in addition to that, of course, you've got the Royal Theater. The largest theater on board the ship, fits over 1,000 people. I'm not sure the exact number. It is certainly a massive venue. I can't remember what it was at the moment. But that venue has, of course, its pair of main shows. You've got The Beautiful Dream, which is that variant of The Gift. And in my opinion, better than The Gift. It is so much clearer, straightforward, more enjoyable just because you're not sitting there confused. And of course, the talent, the cast, the singers were incredible in that show. And it's just a beautiful show overall. The visuals, the costumes, the different styles. It is a great show. If you're on board, you gotta see that one. But the big one, Live Love Legs. That is Sequins and Feathers 2, created specifically for the Asian market originally, and it is of course also on the Quantum of the Seas, replaced Mamma Mia when that went to Asia, and it is on the Empress of the Seas, sailing out of Florida to Cuba and the Bahamas areas. So Live Love Legs is Sequins and Feathers 2, the sequel to the one on Quantum of the Seas, and as pretty much the primary difference between the Ovation and the rest of the Quantum class. That was that big show that I was looking for, the biggest item of this sailing, specific to the ship that I was really looking forward to, that I hadn't seen before, that would be something new, and it lived up to all those expectations. It was truly a phenomenal show. The music in it really surprised me. It was not that traditional slower music that I was expecting. It was that club style, really upbeat, get you energized music that you just leave that show so excited and pumped for the night. And of course then, in addition to those production shows, you got headliners. And we did not have a headliner every night. We did not have a full sailing. This sailing was filled with entertainment though. It was not a single show every night. There were, I think, 2 nights where there was not a show in the Royal Theater. That first night there weren't, and that was the perfect night for us to see Pixels as we did. There was of course another night where there wasn't anything in the main theater either, and that was a night that we had port of call. There were other things going on. They put more games out there. They had additional activities. They put the game shows out there. They put more music, and the big thing throughout this voyage though, they had movies, and they utilized those movies very well. They had movies they would show in the Royal Theater when it was empty. That gave you that movie theater experience, that traditional dark movie theater experience to enjoy that movie if you wanted. If you wanted something a little bit different, you could go to the outdoor movie screen. They showed more movies on the outdoor movie screen than anywhere else on the ship, and that is the traditional movie spot. So you could bundle up, watch the mountains go by you as you watch the movies under the stars, or in most cases under the setting sun. But the big thing was they also had movies in 270. I haven't seen them show movies in 270 on the Quantum or the Anthem. They did it on here, and they often did it in the afternoon and the evenings, which was a great location because if you're in Alaska, as I said before, you want to see that nature, you want to see what's going by, and you can't do that if you're inside the Royal Theater. If you're watching a movie, you're going to miss what's going on around you, and in 270 it's the perfect venue because you can sit there, enjoy that massive view, see everything that's going by the ship, and at the same time you can watch your movie on the giant robo screens that they put together to form a single screen to show the movies. And they showed a lot of movies. They had movies in there most nights that were not Pixel nights, and they had them on some of the afternoons when we would be in port of call, so if you stayed on board the ship you could watch a movie and see that view of the Alaskan port that we were in at the time, and even watch that view as we sail away while checking out your movie. So that was a big thing they used to fill out the counter, were all those movies. Sometimes that comes off a little bit tacky or filler. In this case it actually was very nice because it was so well laid out. There were so many options. They didn't show the same movie 5 times, but they showed the same movie in a couple different spots at different times to give you some options. So that was an overall great idea, great execution on that. Something that could have gone wrong, but really just helped fill that schedule and give some more activities to the lineup for people to check out. And then of course, on all these sailings there are parties. That is a big thing that they do. They've been pushing some new ones out there, and if on here we had 2 of them. We had the 70s Disco Inferno, that traditional 70s party from the Centrum, from the promenade in 270. It was not held in Music Hall like Groovy Town. It was in 270. It utilized all the lighting, the equipment in there, and of course then Ovation rocks. Not Rocks Britannia, but easily jumps up the charts to become the second best show after it. And that one just didn't utilize the Vistoramas, the robo screens, didn't utilize any of the technology in 270, but it essentially took 270 down to the level of the Royal Promenade, utilized that back wall as if it was the ceiling, and just put on an incredible, powerful, energetic show that we haven't seen on any of the other Quantum class ships up to this point. So that was an incredible sight to see, and those were 2 parties in Alaska. This isn't Caribbean, this isn't some young, energetic ship. This is, of course, that much older crowd, not as old as I expected, but older than those Caribbean sailings. And it had that same level of energy because the party was executed so well. So that is a great thing to see, and one that you don't want to miss if you're on the Ovation of the Seas. And technology then, they did not utilize what was in 270. I did not get a WOW band, so I don't know if it worked or not. But Royal IQ did work. There was that one day where it didn't load in until about 9 p.m. at night. But beyond that, each day at maybe 10 o'clock, if you went to check, you could see the next day's lineup of activities. And I never hit a moment where it was down. The menu's updated sometime in the morning each day. Overall, it just seemed to work. They do have the chat feature in there for a fee still. I know the Royal app is adding that as a function across the fleet for those ships that do have access to that app, and I believe it's complimentary there. Not sure why they're still offering it on Royal IQ at a fee, because you can use, of course, iMessages if you are on an iPhone or some kind of Apple device, and that is able to execute through the network without an internet package, so you can always utilize that. So when I first booked this sailing back in December 2017, about a year and a half ago, the big question I had was Radiance or Ovation of the Seas. Up until the time of booking, the choice was Radiance or Explorer of the Seas, and at the time, it was a pretty easy choice. Radiance of the Seas, for so many reasons. The Radiance would do that one-way voyage, get us from Vancouver up to Seward, Alaska, give you those farther north protocols, let you see some really interesting places, a little more desolate stuff. And biggest thing though, the Radiance of the Seas would be smaller, get into places better, and offer so many views. We did that Jewel of the Seas sailing down the Pacific coast. You had so many views out the front of the ship. So it just seemed like an obvious choice over the Explorer of the Seas, which would be very inward focused, not give you some great views outside, not have anywhere warm to watch from. And from the beginning, it was always going to be that first sailing of the year. About 2 years ago, they did, I think, a 9-night one or an 8-night one. They just added an extra port of call and I think a sea day in there to help get them on track. So that was our intention. But when they announced Ovation of the Seas, it was round trip, large ship. Didn't seem like it quite fit what we wanted, but it was a Quantum class ship. It just seemed like it was made for Alaska, so we had to give it a chance. From our New York experience, we still weren't completely sure this was going to work. It worked so perfectly. It was absolutely the right choice. And as I mentioned before, the surprising thing is those protocols that stood out the most. Hubert Glacier would have been on Radiance, but both Juno and Skagway would not have been on that Radiance sailing. It would have only been on the Explorer one and the Ovation one. So this choice to take the Ovation over the Radiance was absolutely the correct one. Radiance Seas does have her indoor places. She has that nice atrium with the glass, but her indoor pool is small. It's not as big as the indoor pool here, and it doesn't have a separate solarium that's indoor. The number of people I've seen on the top deck just sitting in the solarium, the indoor pool, and even the outdoor pool along the sides, just keeping warm, sitting in 270. I mean, you don't have the amount of indoor space on a Radiance class ship, even though it is so focused on those conditions and has traditionally been that Alaskan ship. This Quantum class really is designed for these conditions, and it just works so perfectly for this. This is what it was made for, and it did not let me down. It far surpassed my expectations, to be honest. So, to wrap this sailing up a bit, looking back at the itinerary, of course, we started in Vancouver. We had those 2 sea days, bit of a wet sea days for that initial stretch, leading into Icy Strait Point, where we had that incredible morning from 6:30 to 7 a.m. where we saw probably 20-25 whales. We had Sitka, where it rained in the morning but was nice in the afternoon. Hubert Glacier, where we got that beautiful view, that glacier from every angle of the Ovation of the Seas that we could get to. Of course, Juno, we got that beautiful sight of the city right there. We were docked with so many other ships when we were in port that day, but the port handled it, Ovation handled it, got out with that beautiful circle around the Holland America ship. Skagway, of course, you dock right next to that classic Western style town. Just an incredible place to walk around in the most beautiful weather, up there in the 70s at the time. Endicott Arm, Dawes Glacier was blue skies, sunshine. We had all that ice floating around us, but because the conditions were so perfect, no wind, perfect visibility, we were able to get all the way up to the glaciers for that great view, something even the smaller ships often are not able to do, especially this early in the year. And then, of course, our 2 sea days heading back down to Seattle. Had a little bit of rough seas, some mixed conditions with some fog and cloud cover out there, but the Ovation of the Seas handled all the weather perfectly, and we are now nearing Seattle to end this voyage. For me, this is not the end of this vacation though, and this isn't even a vacation, this is an experience, because we had Vancouver for 2 days, of course this 11-night sailing. Now we're going to spend 2 days in Seattle, check out a few of the sites, hopefully be in the space and be able to watch the Ovation of the Seas depart tomorrow evening. And then we're headed to Hawaii for 8 nights at Disney's Alawani Resort. So we're getting the snow and ice with Alaska and all that sun and heat down in Hawaii. So it is the perfect pairing of vacations. And seems odd to a lot of people, but if you look at the flights, you'll find that the cost of flying from the east coast of the US to Hawaii is the same whether you go with 2 legs on a single flight or 2 separate flights. So adding an Alaskan sailing in between just saves you the cost of adding a flight to get to Alaska. But before we get to that, of course, we have to officially dock in Seattle. As I mentioned, hopefully that'll be about 6 a.m. and the Solstice will be with us, so we'll get to see her as well. Next for the Cruise View, this is the end of this sailing, the end of this series. A lot of videos, a lot of port of calls, North Stars, events that happen on board, of course all the interviews, the episodes of the Cruise View, and we also have that time lapse of the entire 11-night sailing. So that is hopefully an incredible video that you'll enjoy. Got a peek at the pictures from the first half of the sailing the other night and it looks beautiful. So hopefully that turns out great and you'll enjoy that one. But next, we do have another sailing this year. We've got a lot of unique itineraries. Of course, this 11-night one-off Alaska sailing for the Ovation of the Seas. Next up is in October, the Empress of the Seas to Cuba. And it is not the traditional Cuba sailing. It is not the ones that go to Key West with a stop in Cuba. Doesn't include Grand Cayman, Bahamas, anywhere else. It is 3 Cuban stops. It includes Havana, Cienfuegos, and Santiago de Cuba. And what's really nice about this one, we won't be tired like this sailing because we leave Miami, go to the first port of call, sea day, second port, sea day, third port, sea day, back to Miami. So it is the perfect lineup of 3 Cuban ports along with a sea day in between each one to rest and recover and be ready for the next port of call. So that will be in October. That is another unique sailing that is only offered a couple times a year, maybe 2 or 3 times, and that'll be a special one. So be sure to check that one out when it comes out later this year. For now though, that is the end of this sailing. As always, I'm Derek Holm. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the links.